Have you ever watched someone you know is smart, maybe even someone you look up to, make a decision so bad, so obviously wrong, that you genuinely couldn't understand how they got there? Maybe it was a friend with 2 degrees who stayed in a relationship that was clearly destroying them. Maybe it was a boss who ran a thriving business for 20 years and then bet everything on one terrible idea. Maybe it was a family member, brilliant, sharp, someone people go to for advice, who fell for a scam that a 10-year-old could have spotted. And you thought, how? How does that happen? Those aren't exceptions. Those aren't flukes. Those are patterns. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Intelligence doesn't protect you from bad decisions. In many cases, it makes them worse. Your whole life, you've probably been told that intelligence is the answer. Study harder, think more, be smarter, outthink the problem and you'll be fine. But a psychologist named Keith Stanovich spent years studying exactly that, the relationship between intelligence and rational thinking. And what he found was shocking. High IQ scores had almost zero correlation with how well people actually reasoned in real life. Zero. Knowing someone's IQ told him almost nothing about whether they'd make good decisions day to day. He gave this gap a name: dysrationalia, the condition of having all the raw intelligence in the world and still not being able to think straight when it actually matters. And here's why that happens. Intelligence gives you one very specific superpower, the ability to build convincing arguments for anything, including the things that are completely wrong. Psychologists call it motivated reasoning. When you want something to be true, when you've already emotionally decided on something, your brain doesn't start questioning it. It starts defending it. It goes out and finds evidence. It constructs a case. It builds walls around the decision so it feels logical, so it feels justified, so it feels like you arrived there through careful thought. But you didn't. You arrived there through feeling. And then your intelligence cleaned it up afterward and handed it back to you wrapped in logic. The smarter you are, the better you are at doing this without even realizing it. If you've spent most of your life being the smart one, in your family, in your friend group, at school, at work, something quietly happens to your identity. Intelligence stops being something you have. It becomes something you are. And that shift creates a very specific kind of trap. Because when you're the smart one, being wrong doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like a threat to your reputation, to your self-image, to the story you've been telling about yourself for years. So without even realizing it, you start avoiding situations where you might be wrong. You double down when you should back off. You dismiss people who disagree with you a little too quickly. You stay in bad situations longer than you should, because admitting they're bad means admitting you got in them in the first place. The smarter you are, the more sophisticated your self-deception becomes. A regular person might say, "I just don't want to think about it." A highly intelligent person constructs an entire framework for why they're actually right, and everyone else is missing the nuance. There's a name for this too: cognitive overconfidence. And it's especially common in people who've succeeded in one area and start assuming that success travels everywhere. The tech billionaire who thinks his business genius makes him qualified to redesign public health. The brilliant scientist who makes reckless financial decisions because she figures she can outthink the market. The decorated athlete who assumes leadership comes naturally because winning always has. Isaac Newton lost a fortune in one of history's earliest stock market crashes. Afterward he said, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people." Even Newton knew it. Genius doesn't travel. For a long time, the assumption was that emotions are the enemy of good thinking, that the ideal decision maker is calm, cold, purely logical. Remove the feelings, keep the data, make the right call. Then a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio blew that assumption apart. He studied patients who had damage to a specific part of the brain, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the part that processes emotion. These patients were completely fine in every measurable way: IQ intact, memory intact, logic and reasoning, totally normal. But they couldn't make decisions. Not big, scary decisions. Any decisions. What to eat for lunch. whether to bring an umbrella. Simple, everyday choices became completely paralyzing. They'd analyze every option endlessly and just not choose. Emotions aren't the obstacle to good decisions. They're the engine. They're what allows you to say, enough, I'm going with this. Without them, the brain just loops. Here's where it gets dangerous for smart people, specifically highly intelligent people, especially those who've been rewarded for being analytical, learn to distrust their emotions. They see feelings as noise, bias, weakness, so they suppress them, override them, go deeper into data instead. But the emotions don't disappear. They just go underground. They keep influencing the decision. But now you can't see them doing it. You can't account for them. You can't correct for them. You think you're making a purely rational choice. But fear, ego, and desire are all quietly in the room, voting. And because you're not looking at them, they win every time. Every single person has cognitive biases, mental shortcuts the brain uses to process more information than it could ever consciously handle. Most of the time they work fine. Sometimes they're catastrophic, but smart people have a specific problem with biases. They're better at hiding them. Confirmation bias. The tendency to look for information that confirms what you already believe and ignore what contradicts it. Everyone does this, but smart people do it with more skill, more credible sources, more sophisticated arguments. They make the bias look like research, the sunk cost fallacy, continuing to invest in something because you've already invested so much, even when walking away is clearly the better move. High-achieving people are especially vulnerable here because they've often built their identity around what they're committed to. Walking away isn't just a financial loss, it's an identity loss, so their intelligence goes to work, building reasons to stay. The illusion of explanatory depth, the feeling of understanding something far more deeply than you actually do. Ask most people to explain how a zipper works, actually explain the mechanism, and they'll stumble. But before you ask, they feel completely confident they know. Smart people feel like they understand complex systems, markets, politics, human behavior, at a depth they usually don't. And that feeling of understanding makes them less likely to look for what they're actually missing. They don't know what they don't know, and they feel great about it. The common thread in all of these is this. Your brain is not a truth-seeking machine. It's a story-making machine. It takes in information, filters it through your existing beliefs and desires, and hands you back a narrative that feels true. Intelligence doesn't fix that. It just makes the narrative more convincing. Fall in love with being wrong. The people who make the best decisions over time aren't the ones who are right the most. They're the ones who correct fastest when they're wrong. They update. They adjust. They don't defend. They learn. A changed mind isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign that your thinking is actually working. Find people who will genuinely push back on you. Not people who admire you. Not people who want to stay on your good side. People who will look you in the eye and say, "You've got this wrong, and here's why." Those people are rare, and they are the most valuable ones in your life. Research on high-performing teams shows it's not harmony that drives great outcomes. It's honest, safe disagreement. If everyone around you tends to agree with you, that's not a sign you're always right. It's a sign you've built an echo chamber. Before a big decision, don't ask yourself, could this go wrong? Assume it already did. Picture it 2 years from now, completely failed. You're sitting in the wreckage. Now ask, what happened? Psychologist Gary Klein developed this technique, and it works because it forces your brain out of optimism mode and into honest territory. It's uncomfortable, especially when you're excited about an idea. That discomfort is exactly why it works. Your brain has 2 gears, the fast, intuitive gear, automatic, emotional, pattern matching, and the slow, deliberate gear, analytical, careful, effortful. Smart people trust the slow gear almost completely, but on high-stakes decisions, especially ones involving ego, money, or relationships, the fast gear is often secretly running the show. When something really matters, When it's irreversible, slow down, sleep on it, write it out. Say it out loud to someone who doesn't care whether you feel good about it. The smartest use of intelligence is knowing when to be skeptical of your own thinking. Intelligence is one of the most powerful things a human mind can do, but it is not a compass. It doesn't automatically point toward truth. It points toward wherever you're already aimed, and then it gets you there faster, and with a better story about why you were right all along. That's why wisdom has never been about how much you know. It's about knowing how much you don't know, and taking that seriously, even when, especially when, everything in you is convinced you've got it figured out. The greatest thinkers in history weren't just intelligent, they were honest, with their data, with the people around them, with themselves. Because the most dangerous version of intelligence isn't ignorance, it's certainty. And the moment you think you're too smart to be fooled, that's exactly when you already are.